Ready?
All right.
Yeah.
I'm clicking go live.
Just give us the hand signs. All right. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello, Internet. Good to see you again. This is Brett.
Hello.
I'm William, and we work at Edge Wallet.
Nice to see you guys again. If you guys have any questions for us, feel free to type them on in to either, I guess, YouTube stream or Twitter. We'll pick them up and we'll try to answer them as best we can. Also, I want to talk a little bit about, I had a really good trip, kind of on a more personal note. Traveled around the United States to 3 different cities and met up with we have partners and community members in all the cities. First, I went to Tampa, so shout out to Gabe Higgins, who's been a huge supporter of ours since the beginning at Airbits. If people remember, Airbits was our first wallet application. And he has a group called Block Spaces there that we sponsor, and they do educational events, and they also act as an accelerator for some cool projects. And I actually met the CEO from a project called Pocket Network. Michael, if you're listening, it was really, really great to meet you. That's providing some, I guess, node infrastructure for developers. So if if you're trying to run Ethereum or Bitcoin, you don't have to do it all yourself. You can kind of pay these operators a little bit for your, I guess, some of your computing infrastructure.
Well, that sounds really useful because I know spinning up and maintaining a full node is a lot of work.
It is, and I think we would be interested in them doing some Ethereum work. They haven't gotten infrastructure set up for Ethereum, but there could be some interplay where we use their use their API for some of the things that we're doing now.
Yeah, because we actually ran into a problem probably a year and a half ago by now, where we were going to try to replace Etherscan, which is one of the APIs we use to synchronize your Ether wallet, with an open source, basically kind of the equivalent of what Electrum is for Bitcoin, but for
Ethereum.
The Ethereum network. And we built the whole thing. We built the database. We built the software. It worked, but it couldn't keep up. We didn't have the performance. There was no VPS big enough we could rent that would run this thing.
Yeah, and I think this group, Pocket, might be able to set up some infrastructure. If it's at the right cost, right? Everything has a price. Then it could be something that we definitely use. And they came out of a group that we sponsor and been sponsoring for a couple of years. So it's pretty cool when you see, you put some time and money and effort into a certain group, and some fruit comes out of it, and you can use some of that technology.
Because it's not like there weren't computers that could run this thing. I mean, obviously, any sort of gaming system would be more than adequate. The problem was just that you couldn't rent one from a cloud provider at a reasonable cost.
Yes. I mean, there's only so many people that know how to do it, and then the economics don't always line up when you need it, so you have to kind of do the things on your own, and that's difficult.
Yeah, so these guys are specializing in that, and presumably they've got the kind of right machine mix.
And we've been handling kind of those connection and parsing and downloading or running nodes and stuff like that. But we can, as more services come online like that, we can kind of outsource some of those things that we can do, but we're not experts in. What we are experts in is securing private keys in a non-custodial way, and securing that data that is necessary, kind of the metadata around that private key. That makes a good user experience.
We'll keep your key safe, but how do you connect to the actual network is a per network question, first of all, because every network's different. And second of all, we'd really like to outsource that and not be the gatekeeper.
100%. And that project's doing it. It's called Pocket.network, if you guys are interested in that. Any developers out there that need some kind of ready-to-go nodes. It depends on what network you're running, but they do have a lot of networks. And then moving on, I from Tampa, and moving on from Block Spaces, went to Atlanta and met with Michael Tidwell and his group, the Atlanta Blockchain Group. We also sponsored them. BitPay sponsored them. A couple other people sponsored them. And they had about 50 people there at the meetup, and it was actually about private key security.
Oh, nice.
They had a guest speaker there that did a great job, really getting into the nuts and bolts of what private keys are and what not only what security means for your money, but also your information. So he did a great job there, and there was about 50 people there. And I before the guest speaker went on, I went up to see how many people have heard of Edge. Most people there had heard of it, and a lot of them already had Edge wallets.
Nice.
And I was able to, and some of them that didn't, I was able to set it up and toss them some bits, and had some great discussions afterwards with the group there. And then from there went to Denver, met with a group called Radar Relay that has built a a DEX using the 0x protocol, so you could
nice.
swap ERC20 tokens. And they're also doing some cool work with Lightning. And there might be some overlap there because we're not Lightning experts, but we, if users are using that, we might be able to outsource some functionality to, people that are really good at running Lightning infrastructure.
Right. Because like I said, we're not necessarily interested in the process of connecting you to the blockchain, because hopefully each blockchain provides that as an API. And we've seen Lightning develop a lot, but they have not yet got to the point where there's a ready-to-use JavaScript, drop it in and just use
Exactly.
this SDK.
And that's what we need to make the experience as good as possible in a non-custodial way.
Right.
And then the highlight was actually met up with Brooke, and she's known as Bitcoin Mom on Twitter, and she's the mother of Jack Mallers, who's a developer of the Zap Lightning app, and actually went to her dispensary because she has a dispensary in Boulder, Colorado, and was able to buy some cannabis with Bitcoin using Edge, and they use Edge as a point of sale system.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
and that's Colorado, so it's 100% legal.
Oh yeah, everything's
And you're living in California
monitored.
too, yeah.
Yeah, and and they've according to her, they've made over a Bitcoin in I guess accumulated like sales over time, and they haven't sold any of it. So whenever they get some Bitcoin in there, they only a couple of them have access, and they sweep it out into, I guess, her user-controlled wallet. And they haven't sold any of it. They've just been hodling it for a couple of years, and they've I think they have a pretty nice return on that. And she was also really impressed with the swap functionality.
Oh,
because
nice.
some people, her cannabis shop takes BTC, ETH, and Litecoin. So Ethereum and Litecoin. She got some Ethereum, and she really liked that you could swap from Ethereum to Bitcoin.
And then put that into her wallet.
Exactly, yeah, because she prefers BTC, and she wants to accumulate satoshis, but she'll take payment in Ethereum or Litecoin right now. So that was a great trip. And I guess we'll move on to new topics now, and more news-based, unless we have some questions from the crowd, anyone that's interested.
Well, we do have one question. Are we getting close to adding any exchange providers in Canada?
Oh, yeah, we are. There's actually, I think there's a few in the mix. Maybe when I say a few, I think two that are ready. I think buy will be the first option. I think it might be easier in Canada to
We're
set
not ready
buy.
to
I'm
name
actually
names
not
just yet, but we're talking to people.
Yeah, there's definitely a few. I think Canadian users will definitely have some type of buy option in the next couple of months.
Excellent.
And I think, by the end of the year, will be a couple. I think there'll be a couple options, one or two.
Fantastic.
Yeah. What topics do we want to talk about today?
So the Fed cuts interest rates.
Oh, interesante. Yeah, so there are a lot of people making a big deal out of it, and it is a big deal. I think if you had to pick one number in a credit-based economy, I guess the most important,
relevant.
the interest rate is probably the most fundamental.
Well, I mean, the Federal Reserve has a lot of power in this nation and in the world. And the main knob that they can turn is, in fact, the interest rate. Because what does the Federal Reserve do? They print money and loan it to banks, and then when the banks are done, they presumably return it to the Fed, and that's their supply of money.
Yeah.
And if they're changing the rate on that, they're making it easier or harder for banks to get access to that.
Right, they're definitely making it easier for cheap credit to be created, which are, as far as I'm concerned, our economy, our finance, and our financial markets are solely dependent on one cheap input, and that input is credit. And everyone knows if it goes up to any reasonable level for savers, a lot of debt-based, credit-based businesses collapse, right? And you would imagine the people that hold a lot of wealth and power want to keep that from happening. And the Federal Reserve feels very vulnerable, even though a lot of the metrics that they focus on are, you would imagine, you'd think that they'd be raising rates in this environment. Right?
We've got good unemployment metrics, we've got good productivity, GDP's up.
If you're a person that accepts those statistics as valid, which you and me are the people who would be like, we don't even think those are valid,
how much
highly rigged.
Cooking,
yeah. So, but we'll take them. The Federal Reserve uses those numbers, and ostensibly use that to guide policy. So, and you have in their mandate a requirement for, I guess, a focus on low unemployment, so high employment, and then price stability. So what do we have right now? If we look at the statistics that we use now, well, the labor market looks great. Unemployment's really low. Inflation has been in check. So if you've been someone that's been ringing the alarm over the last decade about inflation for consumer goods, you've been wrong.
Right.
I think they are right in terms of asset inflation. That's gotten ridiculous. I think there is inflation, but it's been focused in a narrow part of the
It's more of
economy
a
that
Wall
only the
Street
rich
thing, yeah.
really benefit from, while you're kind of desecrating the what labor gets paid every day. But that's another story. And then you also have GDPs at a generally okay level. So
why would
GDP
you-
isn't dropping, unemployment is low, and then low inflation. Well, why? Because they know the economy's fragile, and they know the market's fragile. And then they're also, I think, they look politically vulnerable. They've got the left is coming out and the right is coming after them. And the last thing the Federal Reserve wants is like an audit or the Eye of Sauron coming to look at them. You know, right? They want to do everything in the shadows. They want to make sure that their open market operations are not auditable. You know, and I think because a lot of people would get in trouble if the people actually knew what was going on under the covers there. And then in this context, no matter how bad Bitcoin is, or people hate Bitcoin, Bitcoin's going in the opposite direction, right? We're heading towards a halvening
Next year.
So you have this global currency outlook where the Federal Reserve is cutting rates, and yet that is probably the best central bank in the world. So even though there's
I mean,
tons
the dollar
to
sucks, but it doesn't suck as bad compared to like other countries.
yeah, well, are you going to put stuff? But then, if you compare the dollar to, I guess, gold's output or its perceived output over the next couple of decades, and then Bitcoin itself, I mean, I know where I'd want to put my money, right? You have a disinflationary asset that's reducing supply, and then you have another one that's explicitly inflationary, and there's no, what is it? There's nothing down the road that says we're going to get interest rate hikes for savers, right?
Yeah,
It's always going to be about lowering it, and we're going to get in negative territory soon.
If they're lowering it now, they're definitely not going to raise it because now seems like the time you would raise it.
And what does negative rates mean now? Like, if you borrow money, do you get paid to borrow money now?
Yes, that's what that
right?
means.
Yeah, that's like if you borrow money for a house, do you get paid for that now? Right? Is that the logic we're going to be falling into? That looks like that's the direction we're going to be
And
going.
then what it means is it costs money to store money at a bank. That's what it's also going to mean, right? If I have dollars sitting in my local bank, every month they're going to check off, -$5 as a cost for storing it.
It's
with
like
them.
monetary quicksand.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's beyond clown world now. And like I was reading a story the other day that, or just now, that the Swiss National Bank is buying U.S. stocks, right? And the Japanese central bank has been buying like Japanese ETFs for like 5-10 years now. I wouldn't be surprised if the Federal Reserve in the next decade does that as well.
Or if they haven't already been, but we don't know.
Yeah, that's what's amazing. Like no matter how, Bitcoin is hard to use. There's problems with it. There's scaling. There's all types of things that you could throw at it. But at least there's not a squabbling over these like esoteric interest rates, And then you have someone.
You know what the supply is.
You know what it's going to be, and we can focus on kind of scaling the system itself instead of like trying to perfect monetary policy, and when it can never really be perfected by any group of people. So I think it just solidifies the narrative, and it was one of the reasons why I got into Bitcoin. I never thought the Federal Reserve or any other central bank could ever raise out of this condition, or at least in the thought patterns that they
not with
exist
the
in.
Keynesian
Exactly.
economic
Always pulling in future demand to stimulate it now, and borrowing against that. Not a good sustainable model
no.
right there. So I think it's definitely time for asset-based commodity money.
Well, talking about coin supplies,
Ooh.
Litecoin's going through a halvening.
When does it happen?
I think it's in 4 days, August 5th. Or is it 2 days?
Yeah. So you got.
I don't.
You have a bunch of.
When
crypto,
are you watching this, internet?
We have a bunch of crypto economic systems that are heading in the opposite direction
Right.
of the central banks. So that's that's just an obvious. An obvious comparison of what we're dealing with here.
So when we talk about a halvening, what we're saying is when a miner mines a block on any of these chains, typically they get paid out in freshly minted coins. So there is inflation within Bitcoin. There is inflation within
Absolutely.
Litecoin. But that inflation is predictable, and it actually decreases over time according to a certain schedule. And so what we're seeing in Litecoin is going to be the scheduled time at which that reward goes in half. So if you used to earn, what would it be? I don't know, 25 coins per block,
Yeah.
it would now be 12.5. And if it was 12.5, it would now be 6.25. And it just keeps cutting in half and half.
Yeah, and what's important is people know about it beforehand. They voluntarily, submit themselves to it. They know it's going to be in the future, and it's all predictable. And it's good to have constants in general, right? Right now we have these monetary constants they're like quicksand.
They just
right?
change.
They just change.
You
and
get some
now
announcement from some guy in a suit, and all of a sudden it's different.
They at least don't keep their floor, right?
Right.
There might be a stability there, but it's a long-term decay, right? And I don't. There's definitely some space for credit type money and inflationary money in the system, but it's gotten so out of whack,
Yeah.
right? And I think cryptocurrencies it's an expected reaction
So what
to
we would
the
expect
insanity.
to see on Litecoin then is typically the cost of the coin will actually go up. So you might see the price of Litecoin increase over the next month.
It's a demand shock or a supply shock,
Right,
right?
so it's
And
less
if
supply.
if you just assume constant demand, that's just an easy equation to set up, right?
Right.
Number goes up, right? Keep demand, supply shock, and all of a sudden you get a pretty explosive price move. I don't think that's I think that's the dynamic that happens in Bitcoin in terms of volatility upside,
Right.
Like it's the supply shock. In
And
the short
Bitcoin's
term,
gonna
it's
have
just
one in
demand.
like a year, right? Bitcoin's going to do one in about a year.
Oh yeah, and I expect that to be pretty explosive, just based on empirical.
Historical,
Yeah,
yeah.
right. And people will vastly overvalue it in some type of short time frame, right? It'll hit, like we were talking about the other day. It'll ping pong up to like 100K, and then you might have a long or pretty short bounce back, and it kind of bounces around back to like 20,000,
Yeah.
right? And we were saying before, even if it hits that 100K, how real is that price, right? Like, it hit 20,000 before, but how long did it hold that?
Right. So with we're talking about 2017, where the price of Bitcoin skyrocketed, and at one point just tickled 20,000.
Yeah,
But it wasn't like a price you could buy it at, because
Exactly.
you either have to have your orders on the books ahead of time or something, because it was like there for an instant and fell.
That's
right
what people
back.
think, that prices, and I think people are been taught to think in averages in general, and it can be helpful, but I think when you're thinking about prices, it's not averages. It's like the marginal buyer,
Right, right.
And a lot of people.
Two people did a trade
Exactly.
at 20,000. That's
and
at the
that
price
was,
for the entire.
So let's
asset.
say there's like maybe 1,000 people in the world that fit that description, right? They hit that, like they were demanding it and selling it for 20. Maybe there's 1,000 people in the world that accepted that price, right? And then after that, there was no one in the world that was like, oh yeah, let's keep buying this up, right? So then it crashes. So it wasn't
Sustainable.
Yeah, exactly, and people like to. It looked like I don't know. It bounced down to 4,000. So we
Well,
went
I
up
think
from.
it was like in the threes, actually.
It was through like 3.5, 3.8. So you
Yeah.
could say, all right, that's where it kind of really topped off, right? That last, because we were at 1,000, that previous run up.
Yeah, but
right,
that
and it
was
went up
also the tickle
4x.
price,
It
too,
went up
right?
4x. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was like the actual. You could say that was the slice that actually went in and stayed there. Was
like solid baseline.
1 to 4,000, because
Yeah.
it went to 1 to 20. And then down to 4.
Crash.
So I think we could safely say now that was
So
the.
what we're saying is, if Bitcoin does a halvening next year, then historically, based on what it's done in the past, we would not be surprised if we saw maybe it touch 100,000, but not stay there and be
No.
a sustainable price, and then crash back down to say 20, which is still higher than the 10 we're at now.
Yes.
And that's kind of like our new base of support. But that 100 is like an illusory kind of temporary blip.
Yeah, and the media will always jump on that. It's like, oh, it's gone down 80,000, even though it's like it was only at that price for
A fraction of a
fraction
day.
of a.
Currencies, pretty cool. A very, very interesting topic. But what do you do with currency? What drives its use case? And I think for one of the things we're seeing is financial instruments being moved onto the blockchain. We're seeing
Everything's turning into a private key.
Right,
A
right.
private key pair, I should say.
Because if you have a financial asset on some kind of an exchange that's a traditional, like, NASDAQ or commodities future exchange or something like that, you're never quite owning it. You just kind of have a claim on it. Whereas on a blockchain, if you have a private key, you really do control that asset in a very
Yeah.
meaningful way.
Yeah, we were talking about that in the office earlier. almost all the securities in the world are held by these like clearing corporations, which basically handle settlement, transfer, and custodianship of securities.
So if you
right?
own a stock, you actually own a claim on a stock that's held by a brokerage, and their claim is actually held by the securities corporation. It's
Exactly. Where we have the infrastructure set up between things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other platforms where we can basically turn all these anything that's a security into a private public key pair and outsource settlement and transfer to public blockchains, which they're very good at that.
They are.
They're very good at. They're not very good at a lot of things, but they're very good at settlement and transfer. And then also, with the nature of private keys and public keys, it can be done in a non-custodial way.
Right. You don't need these other institutions acting as middlemen when you can just trade the asset directly as a Bitcoin cryptographic.
It's kind of the scary portion of this is that not only do we not, in the fiat system, not only do we not really know the supply of our base currencies, or
we don't know how many dollars exist,
or their future supply either. We really don't know the supply of securities and how many claims on claims are being made, right? Because you have basically a monopoly corporation in every country that is handling settlement, transfer, and custodianship of securities. And I've reached out to some people that have, either worked on Wall Street or managed a lot of money, and they don't really know that much about it. So that tells me that there's some, it can definitely be done better. Our securitization, and it's very native. So like the DTCC is a U.S. corporation that handles U.S. based securities. With open public blockchains, we can really make like global public networks that are accessible to everyone.
The reason I bring this up is because we're seeing the beginnings of this actually come to fruition. Now, not necessarily stocks. Like I'm not going to buy shares of Apple on the blockchain, but an ICO token, it can be seen as a security, and the SEC does.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have these ERC20 tokens. It would sure make sense to trade them natively on chain and not have any sort of middleman exchange on that. And what we're actually seeing is Total. Within Edge, we now have a partner called Total, who's integrated into our swaps feed. So if you want to trade one ERC20 token for another, you may actually see Total come up as the provider for that. And what they are actually a DEX on-chain. They're actually an aggregator of DEXs. They take various DEXs that are on-chain, aggregate them into a single smart contract.
Mm-hmm.
So when you make an order, as soon as your first ERC20 token comes out, the other one comes back instantly in the same transaction. There's literally no delay.
It can be an ERC20 atomic swap.
ERC20 atomic swaps on-chain through this provider. And it's super cool. I'm like really just stoked to see not only are DEXs something that people have been talking about for years, but to have it live, usable right now today in our app. It's just easy as picking what coin you want to go from, what coin you want to go to, get your quote, swipe to confirm, you're done.
It's definitely incredible thinking back in the early days where we just had a Bitcoin wallet.
Yeah.
Right. And now, that's a connection of a lot of different things maturing. So not only our application maturing, but Ethereum itself maturing,
right,
and then having economic activity on top of it. And then we're able to hook you up to a service, an API, in a non-custodial way that aggregates liquidity from decentralized exchanges for you. So you don't have to, don't have to search for the best price or the best. And for things that are very shallowly traded, ERC20.
Tokens,
so aggregating that, because there is liquidity, but part of the problem of liquidity is aggregating it, because it can be you can have fractured pools that can't really communicate. And then Total brings that together into one smart contract that effectively acts as an atomic swap, where no one we're not touching the keys. Total isn't touching the keys.
It's all on chain.
And the DEXs aren't. It's all recorded on chain. And the chain is acting as a settlement transfer layer.
Right. So when you go to trade an ERC20 token, if you're on Ethereum, you have an Ethereum wallet in Edge, you may get one of our other providers because they may or may not have a better rate at that exact moment in time. If you actually want to experience Total for yourself, you can temporarily go into the settings screen, go to the exchange settings, and just disable all the other guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can play with it. And then you can put them back on, because obviously long term you probably always want to get the best price as opposed to playing with the cool tech. But if you do want to play with the cool tech, that's the procedure for doing it.
Well, and then you also brought up the other day, there's another layer to it.
Yeah,
and
Total
how
now has
they're
insurance.
insuring their smart contract. So explain how that works. And this is pretty new.
Yeah, this kind of blew my mind when I saw it. So Total's pretty cool in the sense that they've got this on-chain smart contract doing the swaps. But we've known from the history of Ethereum that smart contracts have bugs.
How about software has bugs? Oh, sorry.
I've never heard that
Yeah,
one
yeah,
before. Yeah. Yeah, definitely these contracts have bugs. And when they have bugs, especially in the case of Ethereum, they tend to be catastrophic.
There's a lot of value at
There's
stake.
millions of dollars that can be burned in an instant by exploiting a particular bug. Like the DAO was one of the first instances of this, where it was a giant smart contract, of like $50 million worth of assets were inside of it, and then someone hacked it and drained all that money out and just took it for themselves.
Yep.
And then
The
what
Parity wallet.
Parity wallet.
had
They
a
had
bug.
a smart contract wallet that was multi-sig
That
basically.
basically locked up a lot of
Frozen
value.
forever.
Yeah.
No one can get those funds out. So we know that smart contracts are vulnerable. So Total, being smart, said we're going to get insurance. So if anything goes wrong with our smart contract, we can reimburse people who are using us.
Okay.
If you lose money using us. And so who's their insurance provider? It's
A group called Nexus Mutual.
Nexus
but
Mutual, which is itself an on-chain ERC-20 powered smart contract.
And what's powerful about that?
So we talked about securities and assets moving on chain and representing stocks and ownership
Yep.
of things. Now what we're seeing is the other side of the Wall Street kind of world is insurance, right? Taking risk and monetizing the risk.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's
And now we're seeing that also get sucked into the blockchain. So I think really there's really three things that you can do on chain really well with Ethereum. One is the transfer of assets and the exchange of assets, because it's money in, money out. Really what you're looking for is money in, money out. If you have real world products like, we're going to do energy production on chain,
Yeah.
that makes less sense because you have physical power plants, physical wires, and things that don't
Yeah.
virtualize.
These
But-
need to be financial transactions.
yeah, but if it's
inputs,
money in,
outputs.
money out, then it's perfect, right? So things that are money in, money out are assets and stocks and trading. Gambling is pure money in, money out. And insurance, right? Insurance is kind of a cross between gambling.
It's all about spreading out risk and payments over
Right.
time and according to trigger events.
So we've seen gambling on chain, no
Yeah.
problem. We've seen trading assets on chain now. It's starting to happen. It's real. And now we're also seeing insurance on chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
The trifecta of like logical things have now come to fruition.
And it's
Well, the other thing about Nexus is anybody can be the liquidity provider. So I can go into this thing, go through the KYC process, which it's kind of annoying, but I can see why they need that. And then buy their token and then stake their token on any smart contract I feel is worth staking on.
And there's definitely, and that you bring up an interesting thing that's happening in a lot of projects where there's a lot of overlap between holder, voter, user, beneficiary, where it's not as cut and dry as like producer consumer.
Right. It's not like you're dealing with some big faceless corporation like an AIG or a Prudential Insurance or whatever, like
Yeah.
just kind of issuing this policy. It's I go on this marketplace and I say, I have a contract I would like to insure. And then any ordinary folk like you or I can go onto the same platform, put up Ethereum as collateral, and then insure that asset, that contract.
Yeah, and this is like a something set up for right now that's focused on Ethereum development, but it could be applied to a lot of different things,
Yeah.
right? And it's a pretty powerful tool that Ethereum developers have. Now they can spread risk out throughout
Right.
Ethereum. So any one bug, it doesn't bring down a group. They're protected in some way,
Right.
and
So-
users don't lose funds.
And so the market can now price the cost of that insurance, because I, as someone who wants to insure, say I look at Total's code base and I say, I don't know if that code base is the best. I probably will go insure someone else. Or I could look at their code and say, oh, their code's really good. I'm going to double down and put like 2 Ether on insuring them. And now I'm like increasing my investment on the contracts that I feel have the best code
Yeah.
versus the contracts that have the worst code. And that's going to lower their premium.
And it looks like people get incentivized for doing work.
Right.
Right. So the token is like it's a utility token, but there's also some equity aspect to it, or equity-ness to it. where you have like voting rights,
Yeah.
over the protocol.
So you don't have this
so-
guy in a suit like pricing in risk. Now it's everybody's making their own decision about what risk they're comfortable with individually, and then presumably the collective knowledge would be better than the cost of that
Yeah.
one guy in a suit. making
I mean,
the
if I was
choice.
building on Ethereum as a developer, I'd love that.
Yeah.
And hopefully they've. I mean, I was going through some of their content, and it was like, wow, they've really put some thought into this. And hopefully they have the Nexus Mutual is what is it, successful, and it can be applied to maybe like user accounts, not just code. Actually insuring accounts
Right.
on Ethereum. That would be pretty cool.
So what else is happening? I think that's pretty much it for the topics we wanted to talk about. I don't see any questions from our audience, so if we don't have any questions,
Oh, we can talk about the new release and then sign off.
yeah.
Yeah. So what number is this release? 1.8.
I think we're like 186. We
Or
did.
1.8.6.
So what happened was we had an emergency release overnight, like 2 days ago, because exchange rates stopped working. They were working, but it just took about a minute for them to show up. So you log into the app and you have like exchange rates loading for like a minute.
And people think they can't use the app because of that too. I
Yeah,
feel
so
like,
we were like, okay, we'll just cut out the provider that was failing, and then we'll just do an emergency release. So
Okay.
really 185, I think, was the last meaningful release. in
And that
terms of
one
just not bug
that was a big release because we just enabled wire sell for users in I guess only users in the U.S. will be able to use it. You need a U.S. bank account, and through the app you'll be able to use wire to buy and sell Bitcoin, Ethereum, and DAI, straight out of or into your bank account, U.S. bank account.
Well, this is actually really exciting for us as Edge people because we get paid in crypto every day, well, not every day. We don't get paid on a daily basis. But when we get paid, it's in crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're constantly needing to sell that in order to pay for our living expenses. Because my landlord doesn't take crypto. Unfortunately,
No, they haven't been.
Yeah.
If my landlords did, they'd be stacking right now. They'd be doing well, but not as I guess forward thinking.
So anyway, we're constantly selling, and so it's nice to just be in app and just swipe, right in app to do
Yeah,
the sell. and
the
not
Edge
have-
employees are very happy with
Yeah,
that.
this is
Thank you,
cool.
Wire. And then we added support. Well, I think this was a previous release, but Ravencoin, which is a project that is actually focused on security tokens and solving some of the, or I guess looking into and focusing on securitization and tokenization of securities. So that's a cool asset on there. And also eBoost we added support for eBoost, which has been built and optimized for gamers and esports. I'm not into that, so I don't really know about eBoost that much, but I think Marshall Long, who's a big time Bitcoiner and gamer, is behind the project. So we just added support for it for all you gamers that are into video games and esports. And then I think, what do we got coming up? Oh, I know. Actually, I'll be at the Futurist conference. What is it called? Peter, what's it called? Give me a name.
Blockchain Futurist Conference?
Blockchain Futurist in Toronto, Canada. Haven't been there in a while, but I look forward to seeing everyone there. We have a lot of Bitcoiners that know us there, and Ethereum heads that know us. Steve Wan, I'm actually talking to you. Will be there. We actually have VIP tickets, right? Oh,
Big time.
We're pretty important. Yeah, so I think that'll be on, what is it, August 12th or 14th?
12 through 14.
Blockchain Futures Conference in Toronto. Edge will be there. And then, let's see.
We got
Anything
August
else?
27th through 30th, blockchain training.
Oh, yeah, Paul Poy will be in Denver. I was just there, but he'll be there again. He'll be teaching a course. I don't know what it'll be on, but I'm sure it'll be good. And then he'll also be in Tel Aviv in September. So look out for announcements for that. I think, yeah, it'll be Tel Aviv Blockchain Week. So I'll be in Toronto, and Paul Poy, our CEO, will be in Denver and Tel Aviv at the end of August and beginning of September. So that is it for now. It was a great sesh, great conversation
Thanks a lot.
with head of, what are you now? We need like a new name for you now. What are you?
The digital monk. I don't
Digital
know.
monk. I like that. William, our digital monk, heads down, making sure everything's secure and private and working. And this is Brett Musser signing off with Edge. We'll reconvene next week. Happy Friday. Now we're supposed to like talk and laugh and look at each other and laugh. Petey, let me know when we can curse.
Well, that was fun.